I'm Nima Rajan, and this is Forum Daily Week in Review. A new economic outlook by the Conference Board of Canada joins others that predict the likeliness of a recession in 2023. It says a recession is possible, but the underlying conditions are working in the economy's favor. The think tank says it expects there will be essentially zero economic growth from the second half of this year through to the first quarter of 2023. It says whether that meets a technical definition of a recession will depend on some ultra fine-tuned estimates, which will not be entirely visible in the annual numbers. Scotiabank Economics chief economist and senior vice president also predicts the Canadian economy will enter a technical recession in the first half of 2023. Well, joining us now to give us his outlook on this is Dr. Moshe Lander, an economics professor at Concordia University with expertise in recessions. Dr. Lander, welcome back to Forum Daily.
Hello.
So, what are you taking away from this latest economic data, Dr. Lander, and what is your overall outlook?
Well, I mean, the fact is that the economy is slowing down. And so we had this nice little blip in the early part of the year when the COVID restrictions were being lifted across the country, and everybody wanted to get out and enjoy themselves. And, higher interest rates, high inflation, and maybe a little bit of fatigue from all of that early partying is, in fact, dragging the economy down. And as you said in your lead there, are we at a technical point of a recession or not? We're going to see that data in the next couple of weeks, and that'll give us a much better indication as to whether it's just mildly positive or mildly negative growth that we're seeing.
Now, if we were to enter a technical or mild recession in 2023, what would that look like for Canada, according to the information that we have so far?
That's the amazing thing, Nima, is that the way that it looks is really very micro oriented. It's not a macro sort of thing that happens, right? If you have a job, if your friends have a job, if your family have jobs, then I could tell you we're in the most severe recession, and you'd look around and say, really, I don't see it. And if you're out of work and your friends are out of work and your family's out of work, and I say the economy's doing well, you'd say, I don't see it. And so that's one of those things that, where these banks and the conference board are talking about technical definition, not technical definition. The issue really does come down to how do you personally experience it? And I'd say that if you have a job and if you can put food on the table and you can pay your bills, then recession schmession, you're probably fine. And I think that's the way that a lot of us are going to experience the recession if it happens.
And are there any industries or particular jobs that will likely be most impacted by a technical or mild recession in the coming year?
The financial sector is the one that's probably been overheating the most, right? We've been talking a lot in the last couple of months about the housing market being dragged down. Anything that's interest rate sensitive, so that could be the construction industry, would also probably suffer under the weight of these high inflation rates. Consumer spending is probably going to decline, and so where are you spending your money? Retail is probably going to suffer. Food and beverage industry, I hate to say, could suffer, and the tourism industry could suffer because the recession is probably not going to be isolated to Canada alone. And where we're hearing about other countries that are experiencing economic hard times, they might not be showing up in Canada to spend their limited disposable income dollars because they just don't have it to spend.
And in terms of some positive news, Dr. Lander, we mentioned the Conference Board of Canada saying that the underlying conditions are working in the economy's favor. So, in what ways is that true?
I think if we're heading for a recession, we're heading into it in good shape, right? We've been talking about labor shortages, right? That everybody's desperate for workers, and so the fact is that there's a lot of good news within the economy. Unemployment is near record lows. Inflation is on its way down. It's not down to where it should be, but it's moving in the right direction. And the fact is that we came out of this COVID experience relatively better placed than a lot of other countries. The government debt, while it jumped a lot because of all of that spending, fact is that it's at a manageable level still. And so there's probably room that if we do enter a recession, there should be areas where governments can offer some spending support without it breaking the bank for them.
All right, Dr. Lander, in terms of the long term, when can Canadians expect some relief from these interest rate hikes and inflation overall?
So, inflation is now at, say, a 15-year high. But, to say it's a 15-year high, it's because for the 15 years leading up to that, it was at a very low level, and we're not that far above it. So, we're going to see interest rates go up a little bit. We're going to see that inflation takes about 12 to 18 months before it comes back down to something resembling normal. But the things are moving in the right directions at least. And so, I think it's merely a matter of how do you view that road to normality? Is that a good experience? Is it a bumpy experience? but at least it's heading in the right direction. And so that's the way that I would say that if you can try and approach this in an optimistic sort of way, it actually does good things for the economy because psychology is going to matter here. And if we see doom and gloom, that's the type of thing that massively chokes back spending and makes a shallow recession much worse. People stay optimistic that good times are just around the corner. It's the type of thing that really can actually be a self-fulfilling prophecy.
As housing prices and sales continue to drop from the previous year, new numbers from the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation confirm predictions of a continued drop in prices in 2023. Patrick Perrier, the housing agency's deputy chief economist, expects the national average home price to fall 15% from the peak seen in the first quarter of this year by the end of the second quarter of 2023. Mr. Perrier attributes the drop to housing demand slowing as interest rates rise. But despite the price decline, he believes housing affordability will not improve. This is because any benefits that can be reaped from lower prices will be offset by higher interest rates. Well, joining us now to tell us more about what to expect from the housing market in the coming months is Mr. Patrick Perrier himself. Sir, welcome to Forum Daily.
Hi, thank you. Nice to be here.
Nice to have you, sir. So, what do the latest numbers indicate in terms of the current state of the housing market amid these interest rate hikes?
Yeah, I mean, so far as we have said, I mean, since the beginning of the year, we saw a decline in house prices and also cooling in housing markets like the resale activity. So all of this points to, as we were predicting, cooling off in the housing markets and declining prices. So that is what we're seeing so far.
And how are these continued interest rate hikes by the central bank impacting Canadian homeowners right now and probably in the near future?
Yeah, so essentially that's a part of the story. I mean, just maybe a bit of background. Earlier this year, before interest rate came in to increase as much than what we expected. But before that, we were still expecting a slowing in housing market from, I would say, unsustainable levels we've seen since mid-2020 up to the first quarter of this year. So now the bank and other central banks have started to raise interest rate to bring inflation back to lower levels, to targeted levels. And of course, we've seen some impact on the housing market. However, I would say that maybe it's not, I think the full impact has not been felt yet on housing market because it takes time for interest rate rise to affect the economy. And as this effect is building from past interest rate increases, but also we're expecting additional rate increases until the end of this year. So those will, of course, these effect will build. So therefore, we see additional pressure on prices going forward as well.
So what does all of this mean for potential home buyers in Canada, Mr. Perrier? Can they look forward to more affordable home prices in 2023?
Well, I think that would be a natural conclusion to reach. However, like you said earlier, that will be the lower impact from lower prices. Their impact on affordability will be more than offset by rising interest rates. So that means that a monthly mortgage payment, I mean, which combines both impact. So basically interest rate, mortgage rate, but also the price as well. So there will be the rise in rates will dominate in this case. So meaning that it will be less affordable despite that decline in the price.
Now, considering that the central bank will likely ease up on interest rates in the future when inflation is in control, do you think home investment in 2023 is a good idea for the long run, Mr. Perrier?
Well, I mean, what I would say is that we expect, like you said, eventually, once the inflation is back under control, then rates will decline from the peak level we see reaching at the end of this year or early next year. But even then, I mean, what I would say is that in the long term, what drives house prices or housing demand is what it is a growth in population. Population is trending up over time. Same with incomes. Incomes and standard of livings are also increasing over time. So that will sustain, support housing demand. So demand will continue to grow. So meaning that eventually, once we reach that floor, somewhere in mid-23 in terms of the house price, then they will resume their growth after that. So this is what I would say in the longer term, there's a trend up in house prices. And the reason is that we have increasing demand, as I mentioned, that is predicted, but also we have that supply issue in Canada, not enough supply. So when demand increases, that puts pressure on supply. So therefore, prices are increasing more than in a case where we would have a strong reaction of supply to increasing demand.
All right, Mr. Perrier, a quick 30 seconds left here, but what about the rental market? How is the rental market being affected amid all of this?
The way we see it, again, it's because of limited supply. We have potential home buyers that now might have put their project, maybe delay the project or just decide to stay on the rental market. So meaning that we could expect rental demand to increase in a limited supply world, therefore meaning more higher rents. Therefore, affordability condition will also deteriorate for the rental market. So this is what we see going forward.
All right, Mr. Perrier, thank you again for joining us today on Forum Daily.
Thanks a lot. Happy to be there. Bye.
As Russia's ongoing war in Ukraine continues to threaten global energy security, a new poll finds that most Canadians support increasing oil and gas production. Now, this is according to a Leger poll conducted for think tank secondstreet.org. It finds that over 70% are in support of boosting domestic production to reduce the global dependence on Russian supply. The poll that was released last week also shows that over half of Canadians agree that Canada could help European countries. Now this, if the government approved more gas production and pipelines. All of this comes amid growing fears of an energy shortage in Europe over the winter months. Well, joining us now to discuss the poll is secondstreet.org's president, Colin Craig. Mr. Craig, welcome back to Forum Daily.
Thanks for having me, Nima.
So can you give us a brief overview of the responses given in this poll across the country? Was the consensus the same throughout?
You know, for the most part, Canadians were very supportive of this idea of developing and exporting more natural gas and oil products. And I think it's pretty straightforward. Canadians have been tuning into TV now for several months. They've been picking up the paper, listening to radio reports about Vladimir Putin's attacks on Ukraine. Those tanks, those rockets, they're paid for by Russia selling oil and gas to Western countries in particular. And people don't want to be a part of that. And they understand that Canada has a lot of oil and natural gas that we could produce and export so that countries could buy from us instead of funding the war in Ukraine. And, you know, there's widespread support for doing this across the country. 72% of Canadians say, yeah, let's do it. And a very large majority of those people are very much strongly supportive of doing this. And, you know, it covers men, women, all age groups, every province in Canada. There's a large majority of Canadians that support this option.
And on that note, what do we know so far about Canada's energy making potential and its ability to support in this energy crisis in Europe?
Yeah, so this is actually something that we've been looking into, and we'll be having a report coming out on this in the near future. But it is just what can we do? In the short term, I think the answer is not a ton. We have to remember that you can't suddenly build a new pipeline overnight. You can't simply move forward with a major oil or natural gas project overnight either. But when you start to look at the medium term and long term, I think there's definitely an opportunity for Canada to produce and export a lot of resources so that the world doesn't have to buy from Vladimir Putin. I think people really need to think of this. It's not a short-term problem with Russia and Vladimir Putin. You know, if he magically pulled out all his troops right now, who would want to buy oil from his regime, say, a year down the road or 5 years down the road? I think they've proven that they're not trustworthy. And the world's going to be needing to look at alternative suppliers. And I think that's where Canada could play a role.
And another thing to consider here is the earning potential. So what kind of earning potential does Canada's energy industry have on a global scale? How would that impact our economy and our faltering loonie?
It would be huge, absolutely huge, if we started to approve more projects, not just to get oil and natural gas out of the ground, but to also improve the pipelines so we can get those resources to the coast. That's what we don't have right now. This is why we can't export enough of our resources to other countries. We simply don't have the pipeline capacity to the coast. So if we did have that, we could make a lot of money as a nation, create a lot of jobs, there'd be a lot of tax dollars. And I think one potential benefit would be if you're concerned about the environment, two things. One is that when you replace coal power in other countries with natural gas, that's good for the environment because natural gas is a lot more cleaner burning. The second benefit for governments is they could take a lot of this, the tax dollars that they receive from selling these resources and use them to develop technology to reduce emissions. So I think there's a real opportunity here for us to help the environment, help the world's geopolitical situation, and create a lot of jobs and make a lot of money for governments at the same time.
All right, Mr. Craig, a quick 30 seconds left here, but some say Russia is using energy as a weapon of war. So if Canada were to invest in this, how would this impact Canada's role in this ongoing fight in Ukraine?
Well, Canada's been a peaceful nation for hundreds of years. This is an opportunity for us to continue with that role. We are an ethical supplier of oil and natural gas. And if we can build the capacity, the pipeline capacity to get those to other countries, then they can choose. Buy oil from Russia and you're helping to fund tanks and rockets, or buy from Canada and you're helping a country develop technology that helps reduce emissions, and it's a peaceful country.
Lots of things to consider. Mr. Craig, thank you again for joining us today on Forum Daily.
Thanks, Nima.
Canadian grocery giants are tackling food inflation with price freezes, but will they be enough? The third largest grocer in Canada says it will not accept cost increases from its suppliers. This will be from November 1st to February 5th to keep grocery prices stable during the holidays. The announcement on Tuesday from Metro came a day after Loblaw said it would freeze prices on all its no-name products until the end of January. Metro says its move will apply to private label brands and national brand products. Meanwhile, Loblaw Companies is raising the supply chain handling fees that it charges suppliers of its grocery and drug stores. But will these moves be enough to support Canadians amid these skyrocketing prices? All right, well, joining us now to talk more on this is Janet Musick from the Agri-Food Analytics Lab at Dalhousie University. Ms. Musick, welcome to Forum Daily.
Hello.
So let's get right to it. Will these price freezes and efforts to keep prices stable for certain products make any difference for Canadians who need relief from food inflation?
Well, Loblaws is committed to keeping prices stable on their house brand, the no frills, that bright yellow packaging. And that really encompasses a lot of the staples: butter, milk, flour. So absolutely, Canadians can take advantage of this opportunity to save money.
And how are these moves likely to impact suppliers and workers amid inflation?
Well, it's interesting because Loblaws is a very strong market player, and they control that supply chain. And so often in a lot of those products, they have a single provider, and likely they'll absorb the additional costs.
And how is this rising cost of food impacting grocery stores themselves? Are they potentially reaping the benefits here?
That's an interesting point. And Loblaws wouldn't probably do something like this if it wasn't to their benefit in some way. Certainly, they're not going to make as much profit, but those are high margin products to begin with that they control. So what's likely to happen here is that they're going to get a bit more of the market share as consumers realize that there's price savings to have, and they switch to those products. Obviously, the retailers are operating in the same kind of inflationary landscape that we are. They're subject to the same pressures: rising gas prices, rising inputs for their producers and farmers. So often those prices get passed on, those costs get passed on to the consumer. So this is an absolute opportunity for consumers to save a bit of money. Maybe not as much as pre-COVID levels, but certainly it will have an impact household-wise.
Now, considering that these initiatives by Metro and Loblaw are set to expire in January and February next year, how do you expect prices to look like in the spring season?
Well, the food inflation number came out this afternoon and it was high, so higher than last month. We're approaching the 11% mark. Usually in Canada, prices go up during the winter season. The winter weather impacts the supply chain. Just, regular old blizzards will disrupt some supply chains. We get a lot of food imported into the country during the winter months. So once these freezes are over, prices will remain high. What that looks like, it's difficult to say this far out.
All right. Well, considering that food prices have been rising over overall inflation for 10 straight months, when can consumers expect these prices to reduce back to normal levels, Miss Music?
Well, I think what we're going to have to do is redefine what the normal level is. It's unlikely that we'll go back to pre-COVID-19 levels for some prices. Certainly, climate change is this big X factor that impacts producers across the globe, not just in Canada. And really, inflation is a global issue. Canada doesn't even have the highest food price inflation. The United States is at 13%. So, and then we have these geopolitical issues that impact the supply chain in ways that are not intuitive to the normal consumer. So we have to adjust what the new normal will be, and it's still in flux, unfortunately, until we see some of these events like the war in the Ukraine and these adverse weather events to kind of smooth out.
Lots to keep our eyes on, Miss Music. Thank you again for joining us today on Forum Daily.
Thanks for having me.
All right, I'm Nima Rajan, and that'll do it for your look at important conversations from this past week. Remember, for more news on demand, you could always visit our website, thenewsforum.ca, and make sure to follow us on our social media handles. We're available on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter for updates. You can also watch all of our news and commentary programming on the News Forum YouTube channel. Thanks for joining us again on the Forum Daily Week in Review, and we'll see you again next time. Take care, Canada, and have a great weekend.